Hello, everybody. Welcome. We pre-recorded this session. Doug couldn't be here today. So if you have any questions during the video, just ask them in the room chat and I'll answer them as best as I can during the video. And then I should be available afterwards for additional questions if anybody has any. Hello, Wyoming Cyber Conference attendees. My name is Ryan Johnson, and I am the Systems Administrator at Frontier Asset Management. Today, I want to talk to you about phishing and cybercrime in Wyoming, and also go over an event that happened at Frontier this past year. Before I delve into the breach attempt on our network, what is phishing? Phishing is a cyber attack that uses disguised email as a weapon. The goal is to trick the email recipient into believing that the message is something they want or need, a request from their bank, for instance, or a note from someone in their company, and to click a link or download an attachment. Phishing also makes up a majority or is the first step in a majority of all cybercrime. So one thing I say at our company is we give them statistics, but statistics are nice and everything, but how does this apply to me? So in May of last year, we had an attempt on our network to breach some of our accounts, and I'm going to walk you through all of that. Before I continue, I'd like to mention that names and some information has been redacted to protect everyone's identity. All other details of the breach attempt are real. On May, Jane was targeted with a very sophisticated phishing attack. The email came from a trusted sender, John Doe at Doe Law, with what likely was his actual email address and not spoofed. Spoofing is where you fake an email address from the actual sender, but it's coming from a different email server. The email closely mimicked a secure mail email. Secure mail is an encrypted email. We use that regularly here to protect private information. And Jane was redirected to a legitimate domain to enter her username and password. Upon entry, she was redirected to a legitimate JP Morgan financial report. So this is something we deal with regularly. And unfortunately, I did not get a screenshot of the secure mail portal, but it was an exact copy of the Microsoft secure mail portal. So she was redirected to that, logged in using her Microsoft credentials, and that is when the attacker was able to steal her username and password. Okay, and then Jane made the proper attempt to confirm the contents by emailing John Doe and got a reply. So she thought the email was fishy and sent an email back to this law office, and that person replied. Unfortunately, it wasn't the lawyer, it was actually the malicious attacker. And he said something like, hey, it's just a report I thought you'd be interested in. Very sophisticated. She still felt the lack of signature and the nature of the report seemed fishy and reported the incident to me immediately. So it's good to pay attention to people's signature lines, where the email is coming from, how they normally talk in an email. All of those things are very important. She was luckily able to recognize that and reported the incident to me, and we were able to take care of that. Here is a screenshot of the attempts in Azure. So this attacker was trying to log into her account, and you can see they tried 5 times and failed because we use something called multi-factor authentication. So not only do you need the username and password, but you also need to enter a code or authenticate using a mobile device or an authenticator app. So confirmation came when I found a landing page was a domain registered to a heating and cooling business on the East Coast who had likely been breached. So this redirect actually went to a legitimate domain that was registered to a business, and they'd also been breached. So the attacker was using another business's domain and website to produce the fake Microsoft authentication screen, which is very tricky. So also pay very close attention to links in the address bar. If it doesn't look right, then report it to your IT person immediately. As I said, the attacker tried breaching the account 5 times. I had found out by tracking that person's IP address that they were using TorGuard VPN, which was hiding their identity, and it was bouncing off of a server in Dallas. Luckily, we were able to reset all of Jane's passwords, and her Microsoft password was different than all of her other accounts. So the threat, was as minimal as possible, but we did wind up resetting all of her other passwords as well. So how can we prevent a data breach? Here are some simple but easy things you can implement in your corporation or your firm. Follow your policies. If you don't have any company policies, I suggest you make some and have your employees attest to them yearly. Don't reuse passwords. Take the time to pay attention to your messages, especially from trusted senders. When in doubt, get a verbal verification. Notify IT of suspicious email immediately, or if you inadvertently click a link, disconnect from the network. Check email addresses and hover over links without clicking on them. Use common sense, goes a long way. Use a password manager. Implement cybersecurity training in your organization. Because we use the practices and our firm has great policies in cyber training, we were able to avoid a breach. Had we not been using MFA, this would have been a breach. Now I'd like to introduce Doug Sanders with the Sheridan County Sheriff's Department, who will be discussing how to report cybercrime and talk about the current criminal trends the authorities are seeing in Wyoming.
Hi, I'm Corporal Doug Sanders with the Sheridan County Sheriff's Office. Today, I'm going to talk with you briefly about some fraud cases we've investigated over the years. These are going to be the more common fraud cases that we see, and then some of the past more common fraud cases that you may have heard about in the past. The first one's going to be the mystery shopper fraud. In this case example, the victim received a letter in the mail that had a couple documents with regard to the mystery shopper fraud. The first one is the public entrance acceptance form, which is from the research group. So it details a questionnaire form that the victim is supposed to fill out. Looks pretty genuine. A lot more effort was put into this mystery shopper fraud than past mystery shopper frauds. The accompanying documents are a public interest research group that lists additional information, and it also goes in to add to the unsuspecting victim what the mystery shopper program is about, how much money they are going to receive, the MoneyGrams that the victim is to send to the suspect. In this case, it was 2 MoneyGrams for $1,650 a piece. And then obviously the check that they receive is a fake check. There are no funds associated with it, but it goes over that. So in all likelihood, that victim sees that they're going to make a couple $100 for what appears to be not much work or effort. A copy of that check is here in the amount of $3,900. This individual that's named as the victim in this did not lose any money. She realized it was a scam, actually called her bank that verified that it is a fake check. Another common scam is by letter as well. The victim will receive a letter in the mail for lottery winnings. In this case, the Jamaican lottery had sent this victim here in Sheridan County a check, a document instructing him that he had won $450,000 in the Jamaican lottery. All he had to do were a 3-part process where he had to initiate a transaction for the winnings, which was a $500 fee. He had to ensure the transaction winnings in itself, which was a $700 fee. And then he had a third fee, which was something that the victim couldn't recall. The victim, as crazy as it seems, the victim actually had sent the first and second transaction in. So he was out $1,200 total. The financial institution he was going through realized that it was a scam, informed the victim that it was a scam and actually refused to send the last $500 that the victim was going to send, saving him $500 from the total $1,700 he would have been out. Another scam similar to that is a sweepstakes fee. This one was a $250,000 sweepstakes where the victim was to pay fees. The victim in this case was no victim. She was very savvy into what that scam was about, realized it was a scam right away, contacted us and let us know about the scam. Seems like when the sheriff's office receives these types of scams, there's more than just one victim in Sharon County. It ends up being multiple victims within the area that report it to us. Other thing to be mindful is if you didn't enter a lottery, chances are, if it sounds too good to be true, it usually is. You can also inquire with money order and bank institutions if you feel you may be the victim of a scam, because they're more savvy as far as being up to date on the current trends with regard to scams and frauds, because they see it all the time and they actually receive additional training in regards to it to help safeguard victims with this type of scam. Another scam that we had recently was a car scam, and this one was actually unsolicited to Sheridan County. It's an example of this one was a Craigslist scam, and the suspect puts a vehicle for sale online with a very, very low price. In this case, it was $2,000 for a newer vehicle. The suspect claimed he was moving overseas, needed to get rid of the car, asked for $1,000 down cash to be sent to him, and then 4 payments of $250 apiece after that. In this case, the father of the victim sent the $1,000. Vehicle never arrived. He became suspicious that he was the victim of the scam and reported it to us. In this case, the $1,000 was sent by iPhone's gift cards, which in itself would be odd to anybody to send a payment in the form of a gift card. Unfortunately, with this case, we weren't able to track it to the suspect, but an easy Google search would show you that the phone number associated with this and the actual scam itself is on the internet. So if you do believe that you are a potential victim of a scam or are being scammed, don't be afraid to search on the internet by the phone number that you were called by or by the actual scam itself. In most instances, when we've seen these scams, you can actually see it on the internet by doing a search, and there's multiple people that have been victims of the same scam. This next case was a recent case within the past year that I actually investigated. Unfortunately, we weren't able to recoup the loss for the victim. In this instance, a business owner was going through her work email account and came upon a pop-up for a Fixit app, which is supposed to essentially be an IT company that was going to assist her in her business program that she had via computer. Unfortunately for her, she clicked on this link that provided her to something other than the IT company she thought she was going to. As this progresses, she ends up giving up her remote access to her computer to this IT company, allows the IT person that she's speaking with to obviously remotely take over her computer. And the whole premise of this pop-up was that the victim would be refunded the money that she was paying for this IT program for the past couple of years. In doing so, after remote access was granted, the victim assisted the suspect in filling out a refund form. And so it was essentially created by the suspect, and then the victim was to put in her personal information, and then she was to be refunded $900. Whereas she got to the point to put in the $900, she took her fingers off the keyboard and then observed that the $900 went to $90,000. And then it showed on the computer that the transaction was completed, leading her to believe that she had been refunded $90,000 and not the $900 that was agreed. She was on the phone with the IT person at this point, and she could hear in the background an IT person she had been working with, and then his manager that was upset and threatened that the IT person would be fired, both of whom had Eastern accents. So she was duped into this, firmly believed that she had actually received the $90,000. She never called her bank to verify that that actually occurred. The IT company was pretty smart to realize that you can only send up to $45,000 through a banking institution per day. So they instructed her to send $45,000 from her bank account to a bank account that was overseas, which she did. And then the remaining amount was just under 45,000. I believe it was 44,100. And she went to go send that. And she spoke to a friend who told her that she was the victim of a scam. And initially, when she went in and sent the first 45,000, the banking institution actually told her that it was a scam. And the victim, firmly believing that it was not, actually lied to the banking institution and lied to them so they would send those funds. So the victim in this case was out $45,000. She didn't send that second check, but unfortunately for her, the bank companies are pretty savvy to these, and they know to look out for it to assist the victim. And in this case, they attempted to do that, but the victim firmly believed she was not a victim and she was out the money. The bank didn't refund any of that 45,000, and the money was sent to Thailand. In addition to that last fraud case, the victim did receive multiple phone calls, and these calls were considered Voip calls, which is a voice over internet protocol. Basically, they're phone calls made by the computer. In this instance, it showed multiple locations and multiple phone numbers associated with the same person, and that's how they can kind of mask their location or make it harder for us to track the suspect in this case. There's also apps that will allow you to put in the phone number you want or any location you want in addition to the VoIP calls. Next, I'm going to turn over to Facebook scams. Facebook is the predominant social media scam that we're seeing recently. This one in itself was an older scam, but it was the information learned from this scam was most likely or appeared to be learned from a Facebook social media account for the victims. The victims in this case are elderly grandparents that were contacted through social media by instant message, or by Facebook Messenger, by a person that portrayed themselves to be the grandson to the victims. They went on to explain that the grandson was overseas in the military at this time, had hurt himself and had actually damaged a vehicle, and for him to be able to safely return to the overseas country he was serving in, he would have to pay so many thousands of dollars to repair the vehicle that had been damaged in this accident. The grandmother was the first one to be contacted by this. She initially sent $2,200 to fix the vehicle, was contacted soon thereafter by the suspects who claimed that, hey, I was wrong about the price of this vehicle to fix. It's now an additional $2,100. She sent the additional $2,100 and then received another call back. In this case, the grandfather spoke to the suspect. And in both instances, the grandparents had spoken to whom they believed to be their grandson, who knew intimate details about what the grandson was doing at that time. So even though his voice sounded different, they attributed that to the actual crash and didn't think anything of it. The grandparent in this case started to suspect there something was amiss. Actually did a great thing, questioned the grandson on who his sister was. At that point, the call was terminated by the suspect. So the scam, they were out the initial 2 payments, which is a couple thousand, but after that point, they became savvy to it and wasn't the victim of the additional $1,500 that they were trying to get on that third transaction. And this leaves a good point. Never be afraid to question the person you're on the phone with. If they portray themselves to be a close family member, never be afraid to ask questions or intimate questions that only would be known by the person you believe to be speaking with.
Doug, that's actually a very common one. My grandparents were sort of the target of the same sort of thing. So somebody had contacted them about me being in jail and needing bail money or something like that. And I was in trouble and I needed help now. There's a sense of urgency to it. And luckily I don't have a habit of getting arrested. So my grandparents thought that was really odd. And they had actually hung up with that person, called my mother and asked if I was in trouble or how I was doing. And then my mother called me and confirmed. So so important to challenge that and call familiar people where you're making the call, not receiving one, and verifying the information before you send money or act on it. So that's a great one. It happens all the time.
Oh, it does. And in this case, the suspects were wise enough to know that they would most likely call family. So they instructed the grandparents not to call the grandson or the daughter because the grandson essentially wanted to tell his parents himself what occurred. So that likely would have ended that had they followed through and called close family right after they got the initial call. And that fraud isn't generally always through Facebook, but it usually will target grandparents in the form of a grandson. Like you said, we've seen quite a few of those where the grandson is in jail and needs bail money.
Right.
The last remaining Facebook scams that we are seeing have occurred repeatedly this past year and in the past couple months involve and predominantly have all been male victims, younger male victims, some married, some single. They end up corresponding through Facebook Messenger and befriending a female. The conversation there shifts pretty quickly, and the suspect in this case, which has been a female, persuades the male to perform sexually suggestive poses or acts. This goes back and forth, and the suspect in this case can also be performing the sexually suggestive poses or acts to further the victim or unsuspecting victim at this point to follow through on those same acts. While performing these acts, in some of these instances, a person with a camera comes into view and the victim sees that. The suspect, the person with the camera, because they're on FaceTime in these instances, tells the victim that he's being recorded, and it essentially turns into an extortion at this point where they threaten to disseminate the video footage of the victim online, or actually in a couple of these instances threaten to send the video footage or photographs to family members that are on the Facebook account, because most people will associate their Facebook account with their spouse, with their kids, with parents and family. So it's pretty easy for anyone to see who the close family members are. In one of these instances, they actually follow through on that threat. And I believe it was an uncle, a parent, and a sibling received the video footage of the male performing a sex act. In a couple of these instances, the victim paid up to $2,500 to ensure that that video wasn't sent. In a couple other of these, they also, the suspect also claimed that the female that was on the other end out there was underage, to imply that a crime had been committed. In these instances, I believe all the suspects in this appeared to be overseas. And one of the victims in these, when they were performing this FaceTime Messenger, the suspect and the victim continued to message back and forth. And it was pretty clear because he actually had the conversation string from that he provided to us. And you can tell he started to question because he'd see the female away from the computer screen, but then would receive a message from her. And he actually questioned her on it, but for whatever reason, he didn't follow through with his assumptions or concerns and continued to engage in the behavior that was ultimately sent to family. And with that, obviously, the concern there is if you don't want something that your mom can see, you probably should not put it over the internet.
So Doug, how if I actually do have a data breach or confirm a data breach or am a victim of a cybercrime, how can I contact the authorities to report that?
That's a very good question, Ryan. One of the things that you can do is you can report it to your local law enforcement agency. Report it to them, let them know about the fraud. In a lot of these instances, the reality is they're perpetuated by suspects that reside overseas. And that's why it's so common, because really they have nothing to lose and everything to gain. Because jurisdictional boundaries don't allow us to go over there to get them in addition to the funding. Most likely we have one victim here, but when you add them all up, it is quite common. One of the things that you want to do first is you want to go online and go to ic3.gov. Follow the prompts and you can report it. They also will show scams that are more common. So there's a wealth of information on that website. And the reality and benefit to ic3.gov is it's really a big clearinghouse for cyber fraud. They have specially trained analysts that investigate them, and they're effective in tracking multiple victims and the same suspects. Purpose in this is, like I said before, I'm a deputy sheriff, so I enforce and investigate crimes that occur within Sheridan County. Well, in your instance, we might have had one victim in Sheridan County, being Ryan's potential grandparents had they followed through with a Facebook fraud. In the US, there might be 30 to 40 victims within the US, and they might be out several $100,000. ic3.gov will track that, and then they can actually combine those cases into one workable case. A good example of that, I had spoken with Special Agent Taylor Reed, who's with the FBI. He's out of the Casper office. He provided an example of food truck purchase. On Craigslist, there was a food truck at a cheap price, much like the vehicle example that I provided earlier. Through Craigslist, they gave this low price to purchase the truck. It was on multiple Craigslist websites throughout the US. Everybody went on ic3.gov. They realized that it's the same fraud. The suspect in this resided in the US. They were able to prosecute the suspect in this case and tie him to over $1 million in fraud from this case. That's a huge, huge number. It never could have happened at the local level. We might have had one victim here. Obviously, being able to track it all over the US will aid the federal government in apprehending them. And that is a big point there. We also will work with our federal partners to investigate some of these cases. The federal government will generally not get involved unless the dollar amount is quite substantial, or it leaves the state of Wyoming. So they need to have essentially what's referred to as a interstate nexus. So the money has to leave the state of Wyoming for them to get involved, or be a huge number. Secondly, you can go to ftc.gov and file the scammer complaint. ftc.gov is a great way to file the scammer complaint because it has the ability to try and sanction in an administrative way. An example of that might be if the fraud is perpetuated over a domain name, they could try and sanction that domain. If your personal information or credit card information is provided to the suspects, it's recommended that you report this breach to 3 main credit apps or credit companies: Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax. Do your due diligence as well, like we talked about before. Don't be afraid to Google search the name, the phone number, the item that's for sale. More likely than not, if it is a scam, you're going to find it online. And don't put any video or photographs out on the internet that you don't want family to see.
Awesome. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Cyber Wyoming, and thank you, Laura, for having us as guests. We appreciate it. Have a great day. All right. Do we have any questions? I think we have a couple more minutes. Take a couple quick questions. While we're waiting, if there are any questions, I just want to remind everybody, don't miss the wrap up at the end of the conference. They're giving away prizes, so don't miss out on that. Okay, James has a question. Have you had any examples of vishing, or smishing SMS attacks lately? We haven't at Frontier. I know they're more and more common. I occasionally, personally on mine, get random texts with links. Really, that's about the only extent of those kinds of attacks that we've seen. Most of the stuff that we get at our business is all phishing. But the personal ones they're getting worse, in my opinion. The best thing to do is just ignore them. I've never clicked on one of the links, but I'd imagine that doesn't end well for most people. And it probably depends on the platform you're using, but I'd imagine a lot of those links take advantage of iOS or Android. Great question. I apologize. I don't have any examples of those problems at our business because we don't really use company cell phones or anything like that too much.